Hi, I'm Stuart from Australian Clutch. So I'm going to show you how to install a pull-to-push conversion for the early and late model Impreza WRXs. We use this conversion for our multi-plate clutch kits in 200 and 185mm. Today I'm just going to show you the critical components and how they fit onto the transmission. The first thing we're going to do is lubricate the inner edge of this fork. We also need to lubricate the shaft. And then what we're going to do is just reinstall the fork in its normal orientation. The next thing we're going to do is install this little pivot conversion. It's got two little ridges on this side which actually sit on and against the back of the fork there. So what we'll do is we'll just put a little bit of thread lock onto the bolt that holds it on and make sure that's not going to come loose. Then we'll put the thread at the very top of that little block, which will actually go like that. Screw that in and tighten it up so it doesn't come loose. The next thing we're going to do is install the slave cylinder so that it's pushing towards the rear of the vehicle, and the kit comes with a bunch of spacers or washers to space the slave cylinder backwards, so they sit in between the transmission and the slave cylinder. So we just put them behind there, install the bolts and tighten them up. With the slave cylinder facing in the opposite direction, we're then going to install the conversion rod. First of all, we're going to lubricate the push rod on this end and the thread which acts as a pivot at the other end. Once they're lubricated, we can then slide the push rod end into the slave cylinder and over the fork, and we can then move that back. We then want to check the operation of it to make sure that it's not hitting on the slave cylinder, and then what we can do is make some slight adjustments to make sure that the pivot is actually clearing here and that this is also allowing the fork to go back as far as possible. The next thing to do is to lubricate the thrust bearing carrier with some grease in there, and we want to make sure there's some on the shaft on the gearbox here, and then we also want to put some lubrication onto the pivot points for the thrust bearing 2 on the actual fork there and on the bearing carrier itself. We can then slide the bearing carrier on to the shaft and into the transmission like that, and check that the operation is smooth. Once you've installed the conversion parts onto the transmission and you've installed the transmission onto the vehicle, it's important to check that you still have some free play available at the top of the fork here to allow the clutch to wear. This can be adjusted by adjusting the adjustment screw here and also by adjusting the push rod at the end of the slave cylinder. This has been demonstrated on a 5-speed Impreza WRX gearbox, but this is very similar operation and very similar components for a 6-speed.